He showed up at her door with 2 coffees and 4 words that changed everything. Jade had been careful. She had taken her time, kept her guard up, let things move slowly, and it had been working. Until that Friday morning, when Rhett looked at her and said he needed to tell her something. Something about why he really went quiet. And the way he said it told her instantly that whatever came next, she wasn't ready for it. Welcome back. If you're new here, go watch part 1 first. The link is in the description. If you've been here from the beginning, thank you. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get back to Jade, because what she's about to hear is going to change everything she thought she understood about Rhett Weston. I took one of the coffees because it gave me something to do with my hands. He came inside, and I didn't stop him, and we stood in my living room in the early morning light, with that sentence still hanging between us. I need to tell you something about why I really went quiet. I waited. Rhett looked at the coffee cup in his hand for a moment, then set it on the counter and turned to face me fully. No deflection, no warm-up, just him, deciding to say something he'd clearly been carrying for a while. When things started getting serious between us, he said, I got scared. Not of you, of how much I wanted it to work. I kept my expression steady. That's not a reason to shut down. I know. I'm not saying it's a reason. I'm saying it's what happened. He paused. My parents were bad at it, being together. And I watched that for 18 years. And I told myself I'd never need someone the way my dad needed my mom. Because needing someone that much just gives them the power to wreck you. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly, and then it was quiet again. I had known pieces of this. He'd mentioned his parents before, briefly, in the way people mention things they don't want examined. But I hadn't known the full shape of it until now. So, when it started feeling like that, he continued, like I actually needed you, I pulled back. And I told myself I was protecting both of us. I looked at him. You were protecting yourself. He held my gaze. Yeah, he said. I was. I appreciated that he didn't argue it. I took a slow breath and set my coffee down on the table, buying myself a second to figure out what I actually felt. There was something loosening in my chest that I wasn't sure I wanted to loosen. Because the thing about finally getting an honest answer from someone who never gives them is that it makes it very hard to stay where you are. I spent a long time waiting for you to let me in, I said. And you kept the door just open enough that I didn't leave, but not enough that I ever felt sure. He nodded slowly. I know. That's a hard thing to come back from, Rhett. I know that too. He took a step closer, not much, just enough that the distance between us went from conversational to something else. His voice dropped slightly. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking you to let me show you it's different now. I looked up at him. He was close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the effort it was taking him to stay still and not reach for me. And I felt it. That pull that had never fully gone away, no matter how sensible I'd tried to be about all of this. I didn't close the distance, but I didn't step back either. You should have told me this 7 months ago, I said quietly. Yeah, he said. I should have told you a lot of things. He stayed for breakfast. Not planned. I just started making eggs at some point, because the conversation had slowed into something quieter and more comfortable, and it felt strange to ask him to leave. He sat at the counter and watched me move around the kitchen, and we talked about small things, easy things. And underneath all of it was everything we'd just said, sitting there like something that had finally been set down after being carried too long. It felt different. Not resolved, not simple, but different. After we ate, he helped me wash the dishes without being asked, which sounds like nothing, but wasn't. We stood side by side at the sink, and at some point our arms touched, and neither of us moved away. And I was very aware of that. The warmth of him next to me, the unhurried way he dried each dish, the domesticity of it, it all felt dangerously close to something I wanted. When we were done, he leaned against the counter and looked at me with that calm, focused attention and said, "What are you doing tonight?" "Nothing planned," I said, which was true and also felt like a decision. "Come somewhere with me," he said. "Where?" "There's a place out past the river, an overlook. I used to go there when I needed to think." He said it simply, not as a romantic gesture, but as something genuine. He was offering me something that was actually his. I said yes. We went separately and met there as the sun was getting low, and it was exactly what he'd described. A wide gravel pullout at the edge of a bluff, with the city spread out below and the sky going orange and pink above it. We sat on the hood of his truck, with our shoulders almost touching, and didn't talk much, which somehow said more than talking would have. At some point, he reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, so casually that it took me a second to register it had happened. His fingers barely grazed my jaw, and then he was looking back at the skyline like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. My heart was doing that inconvenient thing again, and I was tired of pretending it wasn't. "Rhett," I said quietly. He turned to look at me. We were close, closer than I'd realized. The last of the light was catching the angles of his face, and he looked at me with that expression I'd never been able to fully read, the one that felt like it meant more than he knew how to say. I didn't plan what happened next. He leaned in slightly, almost a question, and I closed the remaining distance and kissed him. It was slow and careful, and nothing like I'd been telling myself I didn't want. He kissed me back, with one hand coming up to rest against my face, steady and certain. And when we pulled apart, he kept his forehead against mine for a moment, and neither of us said anything. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled back just enough to glance at it, and something shifted in his expression. Subtle, but immediate. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked at the screen for a second longer, then felt casual. "Yeah," he said, but he didn't put the phone away. I told myself it was nothing. The phone, the shift in his expression, the way he'd gone somewhere else for just a second. I told myself I was reading into it because that's what I did, because I'd spent so long waiting for something to go wrong with Rhett that I'd gotten good at finding it before it existed. We drove back separately, and he texted me when he got home. Just, "Got in safe." I stared at that for a moment, then smiled in spite of myself, and put the phone down. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. The next few days were good. Easy in the way things had been before, but warmer now, with that kiss sitting between us like something that had changed the temperature of everything. He was attentive without being overwhelming. A text in the morning, a call in the evening, showing up Tuesday with food because I'd mentioned offhand that I hadn't had time to grocery shop. We didn't talk about what we were. It felt too early and also somehow unnecessary. Like the conversation would happen when it was ready and not before. Priya, to her credit, only said, "I told you," once. On Thursday, he asked if I wanted to come over to his place that weekend. I said yes. His apartment was exactly what I expected. Clean, minimal, functional, with one wall of windows that looked out over the street, and a bookshelf that told me more about him than most conversations had. I stood in front of it while he opened a bottle of wine in the kitchen and ran my fingers along the spines. Engineering manuals, a few paperbacks, a worn copy of a Cormac McCarthy novel that looked like it had been read more than once. He came up behind me and handed me a glass and looked at the shelf over my shoulder. "Go ahead," he said, "whatever you're about to say." "I'm not going to say anything." "You have a face." "I always have a face," I said. And he laughed, low and quiet, close enough that I felt it more than heard it. We ended up on his couch, with the wine and a movie neither of us was really watching, my legs across his lap, his hand resting on my ankle with an ease that felt like it belonged there. At some point the movie ended, and we were just talking in the dark, the city lights coming through the windows, and he turned to look at me with that expression that had no name. He reached out and brushed his thumb along my cheek, slow and deliberate, and I leaned into it before I could think about whether I should. He kissed me again, longer this time, with his hand moving into my hair, and mine finding the front of his shirt, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both quiet for a moment. "Stay," he said. Just that. One word, said carefully, like he knew exactly how much it was asking. I looked at him in the low light and felt the full weight of what I was about to decide, and then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen out of reflex. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from a city I knew, the same city where Rhett had grown up. I declined the call. It wasn't a decision exactly, more like a reflex, choosing what was in front of me over whatever that was. Rhett watched me set the phone face down and didn't ask, which I appreciated. I looked at him and said, "Stay," back to him, quietly, and something in his expression settled. I didn't go home that night. We stayed up too late talking, the wine long finished, the city outside going quieter by the hour. At some point, I fell asleep on his couch and woke up with a blanket over me that I hadn't put there, and morning light coming through the windows. He was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen, and when he saw me, he just said, "Coffee?" Like this was something we did, like it was ordinary. It felt ordinary. That was the part that got me. The next morning I drove home with that warm, careful feeling sitting in my chest, and I let myself have it without immediately picking it apart. For about 4 hours. Then I Googled the area code. Memphis. Rhett was from Memphis. He'd moved to Nashville at 22 for work and never gone back, or so he'd said. He'd mentioned his parents the way people mention closed chapters, past tense, distant, done. So why was someone calling me from Memphis? I told myself it was nothing, a wrong number, a coincidence. But the timing of it sat wrong, and I couldn't quite put it down. I didn't say anything to Rhett that day, or the next. We saw each other Wednesday evening, dinner at his place, easy and warm and exactly what we'd been building toward. He was present in a way he hadn't been before, attentive, unhurried, like he'd made a decision and was living inside it. It made it harder to bring up the thing I was still turning over. But on Thursday, the number called again. Same area code, same unknown contact. This time I answered. There was a brief pause, and then a woman's voice said, "Is this Jade?" Calm, measured, slightly older. My stomach dropped in a way I couldn't fully explain. "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" Another pause. "My name is Carol Weston," she said. "Rhett's mother. I'm sorry to call out of nowhere. I got your number from his phone the last time I visited. I need to talk to you about something. Something I think you should know before this goes any further." I sat very still. Outside my window, the street was exactly the same as it always was. Cars, wind, the neighbor's dog barking twice and stopping. Everything normal and unchanged. "What kind of something?" I asked. Her voice was careful when she answered, not unkind, just serious in the way of someone who had been holding something for a long time and had finally decided it was time to put it down. What she said next wasn't what I expected. It wasn't another woman. It wasn't a secret life. It wasn't any of the things my mind had already started building. It was something smaller and more complicated than that. And somehow, because of that, it was worse. Carol Weston told me that Rhett had been offered a position in Seattle. A significant one. A senior role at a large firm. The kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. She'd found out through his uncle, who knew someone involved in the hiring. The offer had come in 6 weeks ago. Around the same time Rhett had shown up at Danny's party. Around the same time he'd started calling. She wasn't calling to hurt me. She made that clear. Her voice was measured and not unkind, and I believed her when she said she just thought I deserved to know before I made decisions based on incomplete information. She said Rhett had a pattern, not malicious, just self-protective in ways he'd never fully examined. When things got real, he found an exit before he had to admit he was scared. She'd watched him do it his whole life. She said she hoped she was wrong this time. Then she said goodbye and hung up, and I sat with my phone in my lap for a long time. I didn't call Rhett that night. He texted around 8, something easy and ordinary, and I responded with something short, and he didn't push. I went to bed early and lay in the dark and tried to be fair about it. He hadn't lied. He hadn't made me any promises he was now breaking. We hadn't even defined what we were. But the timing of it, the way he'd come back right when he had one foot already pointed toward leaving, sat in my chest like something cold. I saw him Friday. He came by after work, and I'd decided by then that I was going to ask him directly, because I was done being the person who waited for information that should have been offered. He could tell something was off the moment he walked in. He looked at me with that careful attention and said, "What's wrong?" I let him sit down first. Then I said, "Did you get offered a job in Seattle?" The stillness that moved across his face told me everything before he said a word. He didn't deny it. He set his keys on the table slowly and looked at me with something that wasn't guilt exactly, but was adjacent to it. "Who told you? Does it matter?" He exhaled. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. I kept my voice level. "Were you going to tell me before or after you decided whether I was a reason to stay?" He looked at me then, really looked, the way he did when he wasn't managing himself. "I haven't decided anything yet," he said. "That's the honest truth." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." The room was very quiet. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor, and I could see him working through it. Not performing, just genuinely caught between something I couldn't fully see yet. When he looked back up, his expression had changed, less guarded, more like the version of him I'd seen on that bluff, with the sky going orange behind him. "I need a few days," he said quietly. "Jade, please." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded once. And I meant it as grace, not as surrender. He took 4 days. I didn't reach out, and neither did he. And I filled the time with work and a long overdue dinner with my sister, and a Saturday morning where I cleaned my entire apartment and let myself feel whatever came up without pushing it back down. What came up was mostly this. I wanted him. Not the idea of him, not the version of him I'd hoped he'd become. The actual Rhett, complicated and guarded and slowly, imperfectly learning to stay. I wanted that. But I also knew that wanting something wasn't enough reason to abandon what I knew about myself. I needed someone who chose me out loud. Not perfectly, just clearly. He knocked on my door Sunday evening. I opened it, and he was standing there in a plain jacket, No coffee this time. Hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had spent 4 days having an honest conversation with himself and hadn't entirely enjoyed it. "I turned it down," he said. I looked at him. "The job, Rhett. I want to be clear about why," he said, stepping inside when I moved back to let him. Not because I felt cornered, not because I didn't have a choice. I turned it down because when I actually sat with it, really sat with it, I couldn't make the version of my life in Seattle feel like something I wanted. And you were part of that, a significant part. I crossed my arms slowly. "I don't want to be a reason you resent later." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm telling you it wasn't just you. It was everything. The work I've built here, the people, what I'm in the middle of. Seattle was an exit, and I've taken enough of those." He stopped a few feet away and looked at me steadily. "I'm not asking you to trust that overnight. I know I have to show you." The apartment was quiet around us, evening light coming through the blinds in soft, even lines. I looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the effort in his eyes, the way he was standing like someone who had decided to stop running and was still getting used to the feeling of staying still. I closed the distance between us and kissed him, and he pulled me in with both arms like something he'd been holding back for weeks. It was unhurried and real, and when we finally pulled apart, I stayed close, my forehead against his jaw. "You should have told me about Seattle," I said quietly. "Yeah," he said, "I should have. Don't do that again." "I won't." I believed him. Not because people don't fail the ones they love. They do, and we would too, probably, in small ways and maybe larger ones. But because he was here, and he'd chosen to be, and that was the thing I'd needed from him from the beginning. Not perfection, just presence, just him, deciding to stay. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you, genuinely. Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments, and let us know what you thought. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and we're so glad you are here for this one.